Well, thank you to all those of you who are joining us this afternoon for our third candidate virtual forum. We certainly appreciate your time. And first, I want to not only welcome you, but thank you so much for joining us today and being civically engaged. In my previous life, I served as a U.S. history teacher, civics teacher, and government teacher. So it does my heart good to see the people of House District 32 in Jefferson County sacrifice a bit of their time to become an informed voter. Thank you all so much for performing that valuable civic duty. So to introduce myself, I am Benjamin Geese, Director of Policy at Kentucky Youth Advocates. At KYA, we work every day to ensure that Kentucky is the best place in the entire United States of America to be a kid. And that takes me to why we are here today. We are here today, frankly, because kids under the age of 18 cannot vote. And because kids can't vote, it's up to us adults to make sure we enact policies that will help kids grow into healthy, well-educated, and secure adults. Today, we're honored to engage first with Representative Tina Bojanowski and later on candidate Rounsavall of the 32nd House District. We are excited to learn more about how each of these community leaders will serve the needs of our youth should they be re-elected or elected this November. Please remember that each candidate will be joining separately for today's question and answer session. So be sure to stick around to hear each candidate's perspective. Each candidate will be given the same questions and amount of Q&A time to ensure fairness. Before I pass things along to KYA's Chief Operating Officer Patricia Tinen, who will be leading our Q&A session with the candidates, I want to share that should any audience member have a question that is not addressed today, please feel free to email me your question, and I will be sure to pass that information along to the candidates. For reference, my email is bgeese, that's G-I-E-S, at kyouth.org. I believe my email is also going to pop up in the chat box here shortly. But without much further ado, please join me in welcoming my friend and colleague and our Chief Operating Officer, Patricia Tinen of KYA.
Thanks, Ben. And thank you, Representative Bojanowski, for joining us today. This is a special honor for me because I live in your district. So I am a constituent, and so I will be listening extra carefully to your answers. So first of all, I'd just like to kind of start with the personal, give folks a chance to get to know you a little bit. And in particular, I'd love to hear from you what motivated you to run for public office.
Okay, so I am a special education teacher for Jefferson County Public Schools, and I had never in my lifetime thought about running for office. However, I was doing a PhD program at Bellarmine in education and social change. And part of that program is really trying to figure out what in society, what changes do we want to see happen so that then we can advocate to make those changes occur. And it was January of 2016, and I was actually asked by the union president, Brent McKim. He called me and he said, "How would you like to run for office?" And I was like, I have no idea. I've never thought of that. And so I pulled my mom out of a medical appointment and my dissertation chair out and get their kudos. And so I decided, well, because the catch is that was the filing deadline that day. So we decided yes. We turned around and sent the application in, and it was 5 minutes late. So that was, and I wrote a little passage about it, the day I almost ran for public office. So that was the catalyst to really helping me to decide, is this what I want to do? And over the next year and a half or so, I did some training programs. I did a program with the National Teaching NEA called See Educators Run. I read some books, I got involved in politics, and I came to the conclusion that yes, I really wanted to run for a state level office because the things that really concerned me as an educator were coming from legislation at the state level. So that was my catalyst on how I decided to run for public office.
Well, that's quite a story.
Yes.
Good, good. Well, Ben shared earlier our vision at KYA. It's pretty simple, but it's profound. And that is to make Kentucky the best place in America to be young. And we know that while Kentucky's a great place to grow up, kids in Kentucky face many challenges. For example, we know over 250,000 kids in Kentucky live in poverty. And that's in our urban areas and our rural areas. And we know that family economic security, it impacts children's health, which impacts educational outcomes, it impacts safety and vice versa. It's all interconnected. But there's little doubt that growing up in poverty is a pervasive threat to child well-being. So could you talk a little bit about how do you see economic well-being, and what are some things we can hope for from Frankfurt to move the needle on child poverty in Kentucky?
Well, there are a couple of things that are really important to me in addressing child poverty. And one is that we protect, and all of these come from investments in our budget. So one is to ensure that we protect our safety net programs. So we've got to keep our kids fed and health insurance, so KTAP, SNAP, WIC, and so forth. So those programs are just essential. So in my special ed classroom, oftentimes we're not just teaching academics, but we're reaching down and teaching those, or offering those basic needs. You know, the safety, housing, love and belongingness, food. And we need to do that as a state. So we really need to make an investment to ensure that those budget items are covered. To help and support our kids in poverty, we need to make sure that our Friskies are fully funded, so that Family Resource Center in all of the schools. And I know ours in my building does amazing things for our families in poverty. We need to ensure that healthcare coverage continues to be offered for the families and the children. So, you know, whether it's through Medicaid or K-CHIP. But those are some major things we need to do. I mean, society-wise, we need to address poverty, and those are going to be systemic changes that we need to really ensure that we do what we need as a society to change that. And people in poverty have so many things that they're dealing with. I mean, we need to make sure that these children, before they're even born, have good prenatal care. We need to ensure that they have high quality preschool education. I mean, the difference between children who are privileged and children who are more at risk is profound about, you know, what they're exposed to as preschoolers, what type of interventions happen, what type of prenatal care, those issues. So very important. I mean, you know, my colleague says her goal as a representative is to end poverty. And I concur. I mean, whatever we can do to change this cycle will change the lives of so many children.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. So, you know, we're preparing now. I think later tonight, there's going to be a vice presidential debate.
Oh, yes.
There's lots going on when it comes to politics, and many of us hear a common refrain, you know, that Frankfurt is broken, Washington, D.C. is broken, you know, there's a lot of polarization and toxicity. And I'm wondering, you know, you've had experience now in Frankfurt. Could you share with us what's your assessment of that Frankfurt landscape when it comes to politics? What have you learned during your time there? And how can you be the constructive voice to make a difference for kids?
Right. So there's definitely a power structure. And I came into office in 2018, and we're reminded all the time that for the longest time, I'm in the minority party, and for the longest time we were in the majority, and we had the same power and did the same things. Well, I wasn't there then. And so it's very frustrating when there are decisions made that aren't collaborated upon with everyone in the General Assembly. So I find that frustrating. But then again, there are certain items that are very polarizing, but then there are those items that fall in the middle that we all can agree upon. And what I've found is, number one, if you really prepare yourself and you understand the subject, and then you go to your colleagues, maybe on the other side of the aisle, and you have a discussion with them, you share your concerns, they are amenable to conversations. And it always reminds me on why having an educator in the General Assembly is so powerful, because as an educator, our job is completely built around building relationships. You build relationships. So those relationships that we build in the classroom, I can also build and have started building with all the members of the General Assembly, so that when it comes to a more difficult subject, you know, where I really want to have my, you know, my concerns or my point of view considered, we have that relationship that we can build upon and move forward. You know, I think every individual in the General Assembly wants what's best for Kentucky, and especially what's best for our children. And sometimes it's just a matter of having those conversations and pulling us together that can move us forward.
Great, thank you. So at KYA, our mantra is what gets measured gets changed, because we need
right.
data to spur action. But if you look at our Kids Count data, the disparity between kids of color and white kids is profound. And we see this across the board when looking at key measures from child poverty, babies born at low birth weight, fourth grade, 8th grade math, juvenile justice, interaction with the child welfare system.
Right.
And so I'd like to hear from you a little bit about your vision for closing those gaps and for achieving race equity for our kids. How do we bridge that gap? And what role do you see yourself and the Jefferson County delegation playing in changing this?
All right, I can speak on one area in depth, and that is addressing that gap in public education in achievement levels. One area that I'm working on is to address our high stakes accountability system. And so for people who really don't know what that means, so at the end of each year, we take a test. And so, you know, and that leads into the conversation of what isn't tested isn't taught. Mm-hmm. So kind of taking that in mind, we take a test at the end of the year based upon our standards. Those scores are then presented to the districts the following year when children are in another grade with another teacher. So one thing that I think that we can do that will especially help our at-risk kids is to remove that focus from the high stakes accountability testing. And we do have to follow the federal law, but there's flexibility within the law. So I have already pre-filed a resolution to address looking at flexibilities in high stakes in our accountability system, and then building forward. Because here's what happens is what's tested is what's taught. So even though superintendents and principals say we're going to do everything that kids are supposed to get, what in reality happens is if you're testing reading and math, there's more of an emphasis on reading and math. And students who are more at risk might get more drill type instruction and less of what we call in Jefferson County, like deeper learning. And we're really missing an opportunity to fully educate our kids for the sake of just test prepping them. And we need to change that mindset and that accountability, the impact of the high stakes accountability system. You know, every student really deserves a full, balanced and curriculum of all the areas. You know, you've heard as testing became more prominent, there weren't arts, or there wasn't music, or they didn't have different topic areas. So as far as from an educational perspective, trying to bridge that gap, that, addressing the high stakes accountability system is something I already have in the works. It had great bipartisan support. So it's one of those areas that everyone, can, once they understand it, they can agree upon it. And I really think it's going to move in the next session. So as far as, other areas of racial inequity, I think we really need to address it holistically. We need to look at our health and health insurance and public health issues, and going back to that prenatal care, high quality early childhood education. There's an economist named James Heckman.
Sure.
And he has studied, if you know Heckman. And so I pulled out one of my papers on Heckman from my doctoral work, and it said, "I heart Heckman." I mean, so it's amazing because he speaks the language of a high-level, well-regarded economist, but basically what he's saying is not only is early childhood education the catalyst to address so many issues, it's also economically beneficial for our society. So it speaks the language of both worlds. He also, and kind of thinking back about our kids, our kids at risk and our more privileged kids, that piece about the social and emotional development, being able to actually to do school. So, addressing the reading gap. So what did we have? I have the statistics here. About 65% of the fourth graders who are not proficient in reading. I want to think about that in two different ways. So I've heard a lot of feedback from legislators on the floor saying, this means that 65% of our students can't read. Well, that's not true. I think if you know, teacher of basic reading, quite a few of these kids can actually, if you gave them a book, even at their grade level, they could read most of the work. But what they do need to learn and work on is comprehension and reasoning and attention to detail, and being able to sit there in a 2-hour test and reason between 4 multiple choice questions and a 3-page passage. So there's so much more to it than just the scores. And I really want to address that in the General Assembly. So I think I spun off a little bit, but.
Well, I think that was a good actually segue to my next question, which, so we know, during the pandemic, it's kind of laid bare the holes in their safety net, whether it's food insecurity, accessing unemployment insurance, being able to keep a roof over one's head. But another issue that's gotten a lot of attention, and definitely here in Jefferson County, is a challenge for parents who are balancing work, schooling, and childcare. And this is especially for parents of young children. And I'm looking at my colleague, Jessie, 4-year-old. It's right. It's real. And we know, you had mentioned, you were talking about Heckman, and his research shows that 0 to 5 is a really critical window for brain development, for making sure kids get a strong start in life. And so, yeah, can you talk a little bit more about, now that we know that, how critical it is? So what are, 1 or 2 concrete things that Frankfurt can do to address that and give kids that strong start in life? What's Frankfurt's role there?
I would say that we need to pass legislation that says that we offer public preschool at least age 4 to all children. And that really hasn't gotten much traction, but I think that that would be the most solid, concrete investment that we could make into our young children. Secondly, anything we can do to, I don't want to necessarily say subsidize, I want to say invest in early high quality childcare. So we've learned with the pandemic, it's come out, we knew it already, but with the pandemic, you know, how relevant having childcare or having your child be able to go to school is to people being able to work. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's not just a babysitting service, but we need to back up and look at what investment do we as a state make in our child care services? Do we, you know, what are the people who are doing this most important work with our children? What are they paid hourly? It's piddling, you know, and I've worked with a couple of daycares in the district, and just, you know, they've had real struggles with the pandemic, with reductions in caseload, cap sizes for their classrooms, which are fully understandable because of the risk of COVID. But what are we doing to ensure that there are daycares available? I saw in your data book about how many parts of the state are in high quality daycare deserts. So we're kind of blessed living here in District 32. There are a lot of daycares, and there, you know, I met several daycare operators, and they run really good programs, but we don't have that available. So I think, you know, as a state, I would really like to see us have pre-K for all children. And I would also like to see us make an investment. We could do it two ways. We can make an investment directly into the daycare programs, or we could do a type of a tax credit for parents who work with children in daycare programs to offset that expense. I traveled in London with the PhD program, and we visited daycares, and they have publicly funded high quality daycares. It can be done. It's just a decision to make that investment for our children.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's 52% of Kentuckians live in a childcare desert.
Yeah, 52%. I mean, that's
not even high quality.
crazy.
It's just access to care, period. Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, Representative Bojanowski, so at the you've been reelected, and the gavel has fallen to close out the 2021 session. And when you look back at that session, and we know you're a teacher, so if you're grading yourself,
Right.
What do you have to do to get an A?
Oh my. Okay, so I need to be on it. You know, there's a lot of balls juggling when you're in Frankfurt, and sometimes you get kind of caught in all the people who come to visit you and the advocates and so forth, and then really reading up and understanding and thoroughly understanding the issues upon which you'll be voting, and then even separately from that, the issues for which you will advocate or actually draft legislation. So balancing my time to ensure that I keep the highest priorities in focus, you know, keep my eye on what do we need to do. And what we learned in driving change in the doctoral program is change can come in increments. And if we move the ball, I mean, today we need early childhood for every child. Mm. We can move the ball, if we can change the community perspective, the forward even a little bit, we're making progress to addressing that issue. So, you know, constantly to be driving forward and moving ahead as far as the priorities for childcare, for keeping our children healthy. We didn't even talk about the suicide rates, health issues we have in our children. So I'm working very closely with advocates for mental health and ensuring that either I support legislation that's been drafted or I draft that legislation to address mental health issues for our children. Addressing another priority that I would really judge myself on at the end of the year is individuals with disabilities. So when my son Brandon was 2, he was diagnosed with autism. And so he's 25 now. So I've spent a lot of years as an autism mom, but that is a community for which I want to be a voice. So when you're parenting a child with a disability or a mental health issue, you need someone to be your voice in Frankfort. And if I have spoken up and advocated for individuals with mental health disorders, for individuals with disabilities, for my at-risk students, I can see them in my eye. And when I go back in my classroom, I can say, I worked to make this change to make your world better, then I will have had a successful session.
Wonderful. Thank you. And so I think we've got just a few minutes left. So I think you did a really great job there spelling out what those priorities are. So to close, I'd just like to give you an opportunity to riff a little bit and, you know, tell us what else do we need to know? What other, you know, what are the major children's issues you're going to champion if elected?
Okay, so a very high priority for me is the resolution for addressing the high stakes accountability. So that's definitely one that I'm drafting myself. Another issue that relates to children that I'm very strong supporter on is a ban on conversion therapy. That builds back into the concern for suicide in our youth and how high those numbers are and just how we need to address it. Another issue that almost passed through, it went through the House, is a ban on corporal punishment in our schools. We need trauma-informed education. We don't need to be subjecting children to more trauma during their school day. And it moved forward. I was a very strong advocate for it, but I'm hoping that that will get through. It was someone else, I think it was Rep. Riley's bill, but I'm very much an advocate for that. And then once again, going back to the safety nets, we need to ensure that our unemployment system, you know, if children have parents who aren't working and they don't have unemployment and they can't feed or house or clothe their children, they're not going to make any progress until those needs are met. So I'm truly hopeful that we will reinvest or invest in our infrastructure for unemployment, and then absolutely anything that we can do to address the COVID issue so that we can get our children back into school. Because in-person learning is such a high priority. I mean, I'm tempted to just like go to my children's houses and take them in person and give them that touch. So getting our children back in school under the premise that we have really addressed what we need to address for COVID is a final, very important high priority.
Thank you. Well, Representative Bojanowski, we really appreciate the access you've given us. You're always open to listen, and we really appreciate the time. We know you've got a very busy schedule. I think you were telling me earlier you're on to your next Zoom after this.
Yes, another Zoom, and then write an IEP for one of my students. So, yes. So
thanks for making us, you know, giving us your time and making us a priority. We really appreciate it.
You are so welcome. I very much appreciate everything that you do and fully support your endeavors.
Okay, and best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
All right, thanks so much.
Very good, thank you. And so for those audience members who are sticking around, we are going to turn things over to Jessie Whittish at KYA, who will be sharing a bit about our electoral advocacy toolkit as we are waiting for candidate Rounsavall to join for a similar Q&A session with our COO, Patricia. Jessie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Ben. Hi, everyone. I am Jessie Whittish, Youth Engagement Officer with Kentucky Youth Advocates. It's so good to be with you all. this evening, and so great to hear from Representative Bojanowski, and looking forward to hearing from Mr. Rounsavall here in just a few minutes. So as Ben mentioned, I just wanted to bring to your attention one more tool for electoral advocacy that you as advocates may want to use. These candidate forums are one example of electoral advocacy, and electoral advocacy includes candidates educating voters about themselves and their priorities, like you just heard Representative Bojanowski do. But it's also about advocates educating and asking questions of candidates. So we just did that, but we at KOAA cannot host a forum in every single House and Senate district. But you advocates, even if this is your House district, you may want to go have a conversation with some of your local candidates or federal candidates or your Senate candidates. So you can all have the same conversation. And to help you get those conversations started, we developed an electoral advocacy toolkit. And the toolkit provides a few data and a few policy resources for you as a constituent, so you can learn more about kids in your area and share that information with candidates. And it includes 5 questions that are conversation starters for you to ask of your candidates. So I'll drop a link in the chat after I'm done talking, but really briefly, I'm just going to share my screen so you can see where to find the toolkit and just a real quick overview of what it looks like. So this is the toolkit, but to get to it, this is the Kentucky Youth Advocates website. And if you go to advocacy and you scroll down right here, view electoral advocacy toolkit. It's currently item number 1 under be an advocate for Kentucky kids. Very timely here. And if you click on that, it'll bring this up. And so, as we mentioned, this is, oh, hi there. Morning,
Hello.
Good evening, Mr. Rounsavall. We'll be with you in just 1 minute. We're introducing advocates to this electoral advocacy toolkit.
Okay.
Right,
KYA have at our website. Thanks so much for joining us.
Wonderful.
So just a quick overview of this. Here are some of the data sources that advocates may want to check out and some resources about policies. And then 5 simple questions to ask your candidates about their policy priorities, kids in your district, kids across Kentucky, and equity across Kentucky. What are your, what's your record with kids? And then thank you for putting kids first. So the toolkit is, we tried to make it as accessible as possible for both advocates and candidates. And we hope that there will be some more of these conversations. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn this over to Patricia to get us going.
All right, thank you. Welcome, Mr. Rounsavall. It's nice to see you. We're so glad you can join us. So we just had a wonderful Q&A session with Representative Bojanowski, and so now we'd like to do the very same with you for the next 30 minutes.
Wonderful.
So first of all, I'd like to just get started by letting people get a chance to know you a little bit, and in particular, I'd love to hear what motivated you to run for public office.
Well, I think my wife sometimes regrets that we did enter into this just because of all the work. But I'm a lifelong resident of Louisville. First of all, I'm very thankful that you'd have me in here today. I appreciate this. These are issues that are very important to both me and my family. But again, I'm a lifelong resident of the city of Louisville, except for when I went to undergrad and law school at the University of Kentucky. I've been a practicing attorney for 22 years. Have my own practice for the last 15 with another attorney working here, as well as 5 employees. The reason I got into this was public service has always been a major component of my life since I was a kid. My family has been involved in numerous projects around the city. We started the Ronald McDonald House here in Louisville. We've been heavily involved in Norton Children's Hospital and Norton Healthcare. Any number of children's advocacy groups around town or children's groups we've been involved with. And personally, I've been on the board of directors of everything from Actors Theater to the Ronald McDonald House to the Science Center, and now on Norton Children's. And I feel it's our responsibility, our civic responsibility to give back. I know that sounds hokey, but I genuinely believe that if people have the ability to give back and make the community better, they have a duty to do so. And that's why I entered this race.
Great, thank you. And I should have mentioned, I'm listening intently because I live in your district, so also as a constituent. So at KYA, we're a nonprofit, and we've got a vision that is simple but profound, and that is to make Kentucky the best place in America to be young. And, you know, I think Kentucky's a great place to grow up, but we know that Kentucky kids face many challenges. For example, over 250,000 kids in Kentucky live in poverty, and that's not just in rural areas, it's urban areas alike. And we know that family economic security impacts children's health, which impacts their educational outcomes, and which impacts safety and vice versa. These issues are all really interconnected, but there's little doubt that growing up in poverty is a pervasive threat to a child's well-being. And so could you talk a little bit about how you see economic well-being, and what are some things we could hope for from Frankfort to move the needle on child poverty?
Well, that's a very intricate question. I would start by saying that economic development and growth is the fundamental core of my campaign, of what we're trying to accomplish when we get to Frankfort. We want to develop not just the 32nd district's economic aspects, but the entire state's economic aspects. Try to find new sources of revenue, new job creation, bring some good quality, sustained jobs to our state that could help with this poverty situation. 250,000 children, I mean, one child in poverty is one too many, much less 250,000. But I think that also we hit on the key aspect is that the children in poverty are there because of their families and the situations their families find themselves in. So what we have to do as a legislature and as a state is find new ways to have these families get jobs and get the economic stability that they deserve. Because as you said, that will just seep over to every other aspect of their life. If they don't have any fears about coming home and the lights not turning on and the water not running, how are they going to be able to focus on their education? How are they going to be able to focus on taking care of themselves and personal hygiene and health? It all stems from the economy. We have to do a far better job, and we're losing jobs left and right, not just due to COVID, but due to the natural progression of certain businesses in our state. I mean, Papa John's just left here couple weeks ago. We're going to have to replace that. Now, granted, they haven't taken all the jobs yet, but if people don't think that a lot of those jobs aren't going to follow the corporate HQ to Atlanta, they're sorely mistaken. But that's one of the things I'd love to do. But second of all, I'd love to do in Frankfort is one of the things I noticed in the materials that I was sent was we are 37th in the United States with regards to overall child well-being. And from what I understand from your materials, that takes into account not only education, but economic circumstance, health, and a number of factors. Number one state in the United States is Massachusetts. And it's, from what I understand from some of the other literature I've read, it's in many aspects it's not even close due to their education system. One of the things I'd like to bring to Frankfort is some type of adoption of the Massachusetts Education Reform Act of 1993. Many people know in the educational system that Massachusetts prior to the 90s was pretty poor. It was way down the list, just like we find ourselves right now. And in 1993, they committed themselves to a complete overhaul of their educational system from top to bottom. It didn't centralize the management of the educational system. It actually kept, the way we have it here, power within the districts, so that each individual district can maintain their way of doing things because they know their children best. But since 1993 and since their commitment to the MERA, Massachusetts has become the #1 state in the country for education for children. And I think that's something that we need to adopt and utilize in Kentucky to really get our education back where it needs to be.
Interesting. I've heard of the Kentucky Education Reform Act, but I'd not heard about Massachusetts. I'll have to look into that.
Okay.
We're getting ready, later tonight, there's going to be another VP debate. And we hear a lot that, Washington, D.C. is broken. Frankfort is broken. There's polarization and toxicity. And so I'm kind of curious to hear from you as you consider, getting into the mix. How do you assess the Frankfort landscape, and how do you see yourself fitting in there? And to that point too, how could you be a constructive voice to make a difference for kids?
Well, the beauty of this situation is that I know people use the term outsider quite a bit, but that's exactly what I am. I've never worked in Frankfort, never been to Frankfort. I've been to Frankfort, obviously, but I've never worked in that capacity in state government. So I'm going to have a fresh take on the way things should be done and the projects that I want to take on as a representative. I think it has to start with bipartisanship. We need representation in Frankfort that doesn't play games, that isn't withholding this vote just to get this vote, just to get this vote, that they're willing to roll up their sleeves with every member of the legislature, work together towards a common goal. We all have different ideas of how we can accomplish these goals, but we have the same goals. The same goals are a prosperous economy, a terrific educational system for our children, better health care for everyone throughout the state. How do we accomplish that? I will bring a spirit of bipartisanship that I'd like to think hasn't been there for quite some time. In fact, a number of the people who support my campaign are not a majority, but quite a few are Democrats, because they see that we can have bipartisan bills that get presented and shepherded through that will help all of Kentucky. One of the things that I do want to accomplish that really has no impact little impact on children right now, as far as on the surface, is expanded gaming. I want to bring expanded gaming to the state of Kentucky because 5 neighboring states have it already. However, the only way that's going to happen is if we all work together, because for so long, games have been played and there's just been a stalemate in Frankfort for that particular issue. We need to bust through that wall, overcome that hurdle, and really bring everyone to the table, all stakeholders, and move forward with some bills that perhaps we don't get everything that we want, but at the end of the day, the goal is accomplished, and that is our state is better as a result.
Great, thank you. Well, I was glad to hear you saw the kids count data that we sent. So part of the mantra with that project is what gets measured gets changed, because we believe in the power of data to spur action. And so if you look at that kids count data, one thing that stands out is the disparity between kids of color and white kids. And it's across the board when we look at, whether it's looking at child poverty, babies born at low birth weight, 4th grade reading levels, juvenile justice, interaction with the child welfare system. We see a big gap in opportunity when we're looking at those outcomes for kids. So could you talk a bit about your vision for race equity? And do you have thoughts on how we can begin to bridge that gap? And what role do you see yourself and the Jefferson County delegation playing in changing this?
Again, I think it goes back to bipartisanship. I think we have to be willing to discuss with people from all backgrounds what's most, they're just as much a stakeholder in this process as any of us are. All backgrounds, all colors, all religions, all faiths, everybody, they all have a voice that needs to be heard. But especially, as your literature says, children of color, they need more protection. And it's not as simple as just a one size fits all cure for this type of situation. Some of the research I've done over the last several months getting ready for this campaign talks about, and I don't think this is lost on you, but access to the internet. We need to do a far better job of getting high-speed internet to children throughout the city of Louisville and throughout the state of Kentucky. But from what I understand, it affects minority children far more than white children. And that's inexcusable. Right. We need to figure out a way to get that technology and that bandwidth to everyone throughout not only the greater Louisville area, but throughout the state of Kentucky. I think that's one of the other things that we would really try to champion down there is I think that access to information through the internet can be one of the silver bullets that really gets people out of this endless cycle that goes on and on. We need to give people the tools necessary to help them in this particular circumstance, figure out a way to get consistent, solid broadband internet access to children throughout the greater Louisville area and throughout the state. I think that's going to do a lot towards improving that racial equity. One of the groups that I've been involved with personally is a group called the Decode Project, which it targets specifically children in high-risk areas and teaching them to read. And one of the programs that I personally have sponsored there has helped the reading during this pandemic for children, for minority children in the West End quite a bit. So I think that's what we have to do. We not only have to give children greater access to technology, but give them greater access to the tools they need to get out of this endless cycle. It just needs to stop.
Great. Yeah, you could say that access to internet right now is kind of a basic need, right?
Yeah,
at least it comes to schooling if you go to JCPS. So, there's no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare the holes in the safety net, whether it's food insecurity, addressing unemployment, accessing unemployment insurance, or being able to keep a roof over one's head. And another issue that's been getting a lot of attention here in Jefferson County is the challenge for parents with balancing work, schooling, and childcare, and especially for parents of young children. We know that age 0 to 5 is a critical window for brain development, for making sure kids get a strong start in life. And so I'd like to hear from you about your vision for our youngest Kentuckians. And what are 1 or 2 items that we need action around in Frankfort when it comes to early childhood?
Well, I happen to be a father. I'm a father of 3 daughters, but one of them is 5 years old. So I'm well familiar with some of the struggles that go on. I have 2 16-year-old daughters who, for the most part during this NTI process, have been able to take care of themselves. A 5-year-old simply can't do that. And my wife and I had to make some hard decisions as to how we stay home and take care of her and shepherd her through these developmental stages as well. I think one of the things that we have to, first, again, it all starts back with education as a whole, but giving this early childhood development access to more technology, finding ways to new sources of revenue to fund programs that can give them the advantage that they need, such as learning to read. That's one of the things about the Decode Project that I love so much, is that it actually targets a lot of those children, not only at-risk children, but in that age range, who desperately need assistance in developing those reading skills. That's one of the things I'd love to do, is figure out ways to fund programs of that nature that can give direct access to children in need to reading tutors and reading technology that will help them develop at, as you said, during this critical time of the 0 to 5 age. The other thing I think we have to do is we have to, at least in the short term, I'm not a huge fan of giving out large sums of money just to give out large sums of money, but this is an unprecedented time. And we have to figure out ways to get more money to families who are in this situation, because if we have another shutdown again, we're going to have to figure out ways to keep families comfortable. And that's not, I don't think, exclusive to families in a certain part of our jurisdiction. It's everybody. Everybody's going to have to, we're going to have to figure out how to take care of everybody just to get them through this. If it's figuring out ways to give additional stipends for people who have to stay home, in addition to the unemployment they're already entitled to, so be it. We have to do it. I mean, the Fed chair just came out just a couple of weeks ago and said that is a vital element to any recovery effort, is we have to get more money in the hands of the consumers in order to allow them to take care of themselves. So that would be another thing I would want to champion through. It will be difficult because we're already looking at right now a $1 billion deficit at least. And that was from, I think, Governor Bashir, or a press conference he had a few months back. It's going to be tough, but for at least for the first couple of years as we get through this pandemic, these are some of the sacrifices we're going to have to make.
Mm-hmm. So let's move ahead to May 2021. You have been elected representative, mm-hmm. and the gavel has fallen to close the 2021 session. So when you look back at the legacy of your very first term, if you're grading yourself, what do you have to do to get an A?
I don't think it's possible to get an A. And I'm not trying to be defeatist, but there are going to be, I think the best we can hope for is perhaps a B+. Let me explain. We're behind the 8 ball right now. We are in all the items that I want to champion in Frankfurt, such as true education reform, not just throwing additional money at it, but true reform, elimination of waste, development of technologies, development of school facilities, not just in the 32nd district, but throughout the city of Louisville. These are all items that it's going to be exceptionally difficult to get through the first time, if for no other reason we're staring down $1 billion deficit. I think the closest we could get to an A is not only beginning the process of true educational reform, not just at JCPS, but throughout the state of Kentucky, which again, when you do your research on MIRA, the Massachusetts Educational Reform Act of '93, they had a 7-year plan. It was that they started off at year 1 and they knew it was going to be a rough go of it, but just to get the plan in place, to get the stakeholders there, get everyone on the same page and to move forward with development, it was a 7-year process. If we could get that going, true educational reform, get more revenue into the state through expanded gaming, through sports wagering. Again, I'm a huge proponent of both elements. Then I think that is the win. The last component I would also say is figure out ways to simplify the tax code to bring more business into the state. We need to do a better job of targeting businesses throughout the country, drawing them into the state with preferential tax treatment, and creating good, high-paying jobs for our community. If we can do those 3 things, I still think it's a B+. I just don't think you can get an A in this environment. Mm-hmm. It's just going to be very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for that candor. So to close out here, we're kind of coming towards the end. I'd like to just give you some time to riff a little bit and tell us about what kids and families in House District 32 can expect from you if elected, and what are the major children's issues you're going to champion.
The children of our district will get the same thing that all people in our district get, and that is a full-throated, strong advocate for them in Frankfort. I'm not a career politician. I've never run for political office before, and I don't intend on going beyond this stage. I want to go to Frankfort, and if I ruffle a few feathers and I make some people upset along the way, so be it, as long as I have the best interests of my constituents in mind. I think that for the children, what they can expect is somebody who's going to fight tooth and nail to make sure they have access to the absolute best education possible. It's going to take time. It won't be a switch that we can just flip on and that overnight we magically have one of the top 5 educational systems in the country. But I'm devoted to the long haul of this. I'm devoted to the fact that we can overhaul this system, not only in JCPS, but throughout the state, and give children access to the education they so justly deserve. I also think that if the children won't appreciate this as much as the adults, but I think they'll also understand that I'm going to be fighting for economic development and growth there. And I'm not going to be bound by party lines. If there are any programs or any sources of revenue that can be brought into the state of Kentucky that maybe traditionally aren't Republican values, but make sense, I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to be the champion for the 32nd district. I'm not beholden to a party, and I'm not beholden to a person. I'm beholden to my citizens and my constituents. And that's what I want to do. I want them to not, when they know 5, 10, 15 years from now, I want them to actually know who was fighting for them in Frankfort and that we won the case. We won the battle. It's just going to take some time.
Well, thank you. Thanks for stepping up and putting your hat in the ring.
Thank you.
And giving it a shot. We really appreciate it. And thanks for your time. And
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me in this. And if there are any other questions that anyone on here has for me personally about my stances, I can provide you with, you have my email address there, maybe somebody can punch it out to everybody who's watching. I encourage anyone watching this to reach out to me directly. I'm willing to talk to anybody about my vision for the state of Kentucky and the 32nd district.
Well, thank you. Ben, do I turn it over to you for this? Are you closing us out?
Yes. Well, thank you, candidate Rounsavall, for your time today. I know that we had corresponded quite a bit via email. So,
yes.
Again, I just want to thank you for your time and your cooperation.
Absolutely.
If you are a citizen in the 32nd District or a caring Kentuckian who joined us this evening, thank you for also performing your civic duty. That civic duty of being a civically engaged individual and, of course, an informed voter. So we urge you to compare and contrast the 2 candidates today. See who you think will do best for kids in the Commonwealth and make your choice at the ballot box, whether that be in early voting or voting traditionally on November 3rd, Election Day. So thank you to Representative Bojanowski, who joined us earlier, candidate Rounsavall just now, as well as those of you joining us from home. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at KYA again very soon.
Thank you all.
Yep.
Hi, everyone.